on Paladin Gaming. This is a continuation of our reading of the initial database. We need to do the intelligence section. Shivans in the Great War. The destruction of the SD Lucifer in 2335 sealed the Sol Delta Serpentis jump node and all its contingent phasing nodes, bringing the Great War to a halt and cutting off all contact with Earth. With GTI's Shivan research projects buried and the question of Earth's fate preoccupying Terran civilization, many aspects of the Great War remain largely uninvestigated. What conclusions could be drawn about Shivan behavior, organization, and objectives remained highly classified. In the wake of the Capella disaster, Shivan behavior during the Great War underwent rigorous re-examination as part of GTVA's participation in the Threat Exigency Initiative. In spite of this examination, and in part because of it, numerous questions remain unresolved. Where did the SD Lucifer and its accompanying fleet originate? Why did these Shivans exhibit technology that differed from that of the Shivans of the Second Incursion? If the Shivans were able to equip the Lucifer with an invulnerable sheathed shielding system, why did they not also arm these vessels with beam cannons, flat guns, or subspace weapons as seen during the Second Incursion? Conversely, why did Lucifer-class destroyers or their shielding systems not appear during the Second Incursion? This inexplicable variation in Shivan technology levels suggests that some deeper process is at work, one which Alliance analysts do not yet understand. The most critical question concerns Shivan behavior after the destruction of the Lucifer. With the Super Destroyer gone, Shivan forces in allied space lost strategic cohesion and ceased to aggressively pursue objectives. Almost overnight, the Shivans degenerated from a major threat to the survival of the Terran and Vasudan species and into a crumbling army of stragglers. Some researchers have suggested this as evidence for a hive mind model of Shivan behavior, with the Lucifer as a queen or leader, but GTVI investigation contraindicates this implicit model. Moreover, no such hive or source of command appeared during the Second Incursion, where the Shivans conducted defensive operations in the Nebular Theater, deployed a Sathanas probe into Capella, and then pressed an overwhelming attack into Allied space. Given these inconsistencies, the GTVI has been unable to determine the motivations behind their behavior. Typo. As a result, further official studies have been put on hold until more data can be accumulated. Alright, we'll go to the Second Incursion. The GTVA entered the Second Shivan Incursion with the caution and contingent planning appropriate to second contact with a xenocidal alien species. The initial Alliance containment effort was overwhelmingly successful. No unclassified source has ever explained the decision to enter the Knossos portal and attempt to press the Shivans on their own ground, but all signs suggest that the Security Council and High Command elected to test Shivan strength in order to gather strategic information and perhaps secure a permanent resolution of the Shivan threat. This decision was bolstered by GTVI's initial threat assessment, placing the Shivans at technological parity with the GTVA. This bold offensive strategy succeeded longer than pessimists had predicted, and the destruction of the Sathanas juggernaut was seen as analogous to the elimination of the Lucifer 32 years earlier. Shortly afterwards, Vasudan combat elements began to inflict severe damage to what were believed to be Shivan rear area targets. True strategic victory over the Shivans against the Shivans appeared to be in sight. But Shivan's strategic organization did not collapse after the destruction of the Sathanas as had been predicted. An overwhelming counterattack made it apparent that the true extent and capabilities of the Shivan species had been vastly underestimated. SOC recon elements supplied evidence that the nebula beyond the Knossos was perhaps only a perimeter element of Shivan space. In the wake of the destruction of Capella, the Alliance was left reeling. In spite of a modestly successful evacuation effort under severe pressure, civilian confidence in the military was shattered by the sudden strategic turnabout. But the blow was felt on a deeper level. Humanity, as a species, saw the destruction of Capella as a sign of its own cosmic insignificance. The lost generation's dreams of defeating the Shivans and mastering 32-year-old fears were crushed. The destroyers had brushed mankind aside like a tick and detonated a star with almost playful ease. Broken, bleeding, and discouraged, suddenly terrified of the vast and impenetrable emptiness and the things waiting in its shadows, mankind turns attention towards returning to its birthplace. The Post-Capella GTVA. The Galactic Terran Vasudan Alliance was formed in 2345, 10 years after the Great War. This treaty organization recognized the autonomy of its constituents as it provided a framework for trade and mutual defense. The Great War had transformed the enmity between Terrans and Vasudans into a lasting fellowship. As the industry and economy of the Terran Vasudan systems recovered, support for a more powerful GTVA gained momentum. In 2358, delegates signed into existence the Beta Aquila Convention, BETAC, named after the system where the Constitution was drafted and ratified. BETAC dismantled the governments of the Terran blocks and recognized the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Vasudan Imperium as the supreme authorities of the Terran Vasudan space. The General Assembly, sometimes referred to as the General Terran Assembly in reference to the old GTA, represents the Terran civilian government, while the Vasudan Imperium mirrors its function for the Vasudan species. The Security Council, which includes representatives of both species as well as elements of GTVA High Command and the Admiralty, sets long-term strategic goals, handles military matters, and defines responses to crisis situations. The GTVA was a state that encompassed billions of diverse peoples and hundreds of cultures, but was never a nation. It offered its citizens the promise of security and of a future built from hard work, safety, exploration, and vigilant defense. It was an appealing promise and strategically wise, but it was insufficient to soothe the nihilistic anguish of the lost generation. The NTF rebellion exploded out of the Terran need for something to believe in, something more substantial than constant vigilance. Capella shattered the icons of GTVA security. The Colossus, as much a propaganda coup as strategic asset, died in a few inglorious minutes, disabled by a Shivan tactical strike and outmatched by a single Shivan juggernaut. Citizens all across the Alliance saw civilians die by the tens of thousands as the overstretched GTVA tried to protect refugee convoys. It is debatable whether the GTVA deserved condemnation. Its failures were the result of bad intelligence. But in the wake of Capella, the population turned against the Security Council. Pundits condemned the GTVA as hubristic, militant, arrogant, and bombastic. The phrase gambling with the fate of humanity was thrown about. The GTVA had offered security. Now, in the popular eye, it was a paper aegis against an unstoppable fire. Or worse, a military junta that had tempted extinction in order to satisfy its own pride. GTVA analysts saw in this upswelling of discontent a potential end to the GTVA. Conditions across the Alliance echoed those which had preceded the NTF rebellion. Into this gap stepped the Petrarch Doctrine, the centerpiece of which was the promotion of a return to Earth as a beacon for human salvation. The GTVA offered this plan as a way to placate its constituents. For the past 18 years, the plan has moved forward, even as discontent stirred on Terran worlds and relationships with the Vasudans grew frosty. It's not going to come up in the gameplay, but Blue Planet doesn't recognize most of the campaigns we played previously as in its own canon. That's okay. In gameplay elements, they don't contradict, but they're not going to be referred to in here. Earth. In 2335, the destruction of the Lucifer Super Destroyer collapsed the Sol jump node in Delta Serpentis, severing all contact with Earth. The fate of the Terran home planet remains open to speculation, though a number of scenarios are possible. As the center of an interstellar community, Earth could not survive in isolation without a radical transformation of its political and economic structures. On this point, there is no disagreement. However, the question remains whether this transition occurred peacefully or whether Terran society collapsed into anarchy. Strong arguments have been advanced for both sides. For generations, Earth had been the political, economic, and cultural center of Terran civilization. Humans still measured time in hours, days, months, and years. They named their ships after the mythological figures of ancient Terran civilizations, and systems were still identified according to the constellations observed from Earth. The planet served as capital of the GTA, and the bulk of the Terran industrial base was located in the Sol system. Off-worlders identified their nationality according to the old Earth boundaries, though nation-states dissolved after the discovery of subspace and the emergence of an interstellar Terran society. Radio signals from Sol were allegedly detected by amateur astronomers in Alpha Centauri at many points during reconstruction, but if this was so, no unclassified records survived. Any such contact in more recent years, if it has occurred, has remained classified by the GTVA. After Capella's hammer blow to the human psyche, Earth has become an almost messianic beacon for the Terran elements of the GTVA. Its vast industrial and population base, larger than the entire Terran half of the GTVA, suggests that it could become a breadbasket for economic regrowth. Earth may offer technological or military assets that will assist the GTVA in any future encounters with the Shivans. More critically, however, Earth offers hope. With the outside universe apparently a hostile and unfathomable place, Earth represents a chance to return to past glory, a time when human ingenuity and drive could conquer any obstacle. Some GTVA political elements have suggested that this creed of salvation by assistance represents a failure of self-reliance. Nonetheless, the return to Earth currently enjoys considerable popular support. It has proved particularly divisive, however, in relationships with the Vasudans, who have repeatedly criticized the vast expenditures of the Sol Portal project as a drain on economic recovery. We're going to cut this roughly in half, too. Aken Bosch. On June 18, 2365, Admiral Aken Bosch of the GTVA 6th Fleet instituted a violent military coup in the Polaris system, precipitating the Neo-Terran Front Rebellion. Exploiting a spiritual and cultural dissatisfaction of the Lost Generation, Bosch's virulently anti-Vasudan ideology promoted the creation of Neo-Terra as a new center of Terran power. Massive defections in the 6th Fleet, along with the output of the Freedom shipyards in Polaris, gave the NTF considerable military strength. In 2367, the NTF was defeated, and Bosch's command frigate, the Iceni, vanished into the nebula beyond Gamma Draconis. The frigate was confirmed destroyed in an engagement between the Shivans, the NTF survivors, and a Vasudan squadron. Bosch was pronounced dead. What came to light in the years following the Second Shivan Incursion was infinitely more disturbing than the genocidal excesses of the NTF. Bosch's personal logs, apparently recovered from the Iceni, confirmed that the Neo-Terran front had been nothing but an element in a larger gambit on his part. As a young pilot during the GTI's Hades Rebellion, Bosch had gathered vast bodies of classified information on both the Ancients and the Shivans. From this knowledge, Bosch apparently concluded that the extinction of the Terran species was imminent and could only be averted by one course of action. He believed that the alliance with the Vasudans had to be abandoned and that mankind must achieve some arrangement with the Shivans in order to survive. We learn all of this in the cutscenes in the main Freespace 2 campaign. Precisely what his plan was remains unknown. Bosch instigated the Neo-Terran front as an excuse to ransack ancient artifacts and achieve his own ends. He constructed the ETAC quantum pulse device using information from GTI's Project Nagari stolen from Vasudan sources. He deployed the NTC Trinity to attract Shivan attention to Allied space, and in a callous sacrifice of his own followers, Bosch led a staggeringly costly advance through Capella and into the nebula itself. The Iceni jumped through the nebula, broadcasting signals from the ETAC device for some time. After considerable effort, the Iceni made peaceful contact with Shivan forces, which had apparently been stalking it for weeks. Shivans boarded the Iceni, captured and retrieved Bosch's command crew, and then slaughtered the remainder. Bosch vanished into Shivan space. Shortly thereafter, the Capella detonation occurred. Where these two events are remotely related is unknown. It is rumored that GTVI operatives retrieved survivors and the schematics of the ETAC device from the Iceni. That was an appropriate change in music there. We're going to proceed to the Vasudans, and then I'm going to take a break for my voice's sake, and we'll continue this another day. The Vasudans are a civilization of philosophers, artists, and scholars. They immerse themselves in the teachings of those who came before them, perceiving history not as a linear chronology of events, but as a space inhabited by both the living and the dead. To the Terran outsider, Vasudan society appears convoluted and ritualistic. The Vasudans themselves may seem arrogant, treacherous, and superstitious. On the other hand, Vasudans tend to view Terrans as aggressive, paranoid, and stupid. 30 years of peaceful interaction between Terrans and Vasudans has helped to deconstruct these stereotypes. The crowning achievement of the Vasudan civilization is its language. For the average Terran, the formalities governing its usage are beyond comprehension. Syntax and vocabulary are dictated by such factors as the speaker's age, rank, and caste, the time of day and the phase of the Vasudan calendar, and the relative spatial position of the speaker to the Emperor. This is further compounded by the existence of several alphabets, dozens of verb tenses, and thousands of dialects. The translation device is standard on all GTVA communication systems, enabling Terrans and Vasudans to understand each other. Because the Vasudan homeworld was primarily desert, the Terrans used Egyptian names to designate Vasudan warships during the Terran-Vasudan War and the Great War. After the defeat of the Shivans, the Vasudans insisted on maintaining this convention. The Emperor strongly identified with the history of ancient Egypt, particularly the longevity of its civilization. Following their Emperor's example, Vasudans will take on what they call a Terran name from the myths and history of ancient Egypt. In the years following Capella, Vasudan civilization has prospered. Their unique views on morality and history have allowed the Vasudans to overcome the loss of their homeworld. While much of Vasudan culture may seem melancholy, a people birthed in sorrow die in sorrow, Vasudan scientists, engineers, artists, writers, and poets continue to add to a staggeringly rich cultural tapestry. The comparative success of Vasudan economic and political policy vis-a-vis Terran collapse and single-minded focus on the return to Sol has created considerable rifts in the Alliance. Terran-Vasudan relations are at a low not seen since Reconstruction. In spite of its deep historical roots, Vasudan society today is vibrant, prosperous, and outward-looking. Yet Capella did not leave the Imperium untouched. The past 18 years have seen the resurgence of the Hammer of Light ideology in a more contemplative and less militaristic form. Many Vasudans continue to believe that the Shivans are the hammer of the universe's judgment, a punishment for sin on the species-wide level. Some Hammer of Light thinkers claim that the Shivans consistently arrive when one species is engaged in violence against another, citing the Ancients, the Terran-Vasudan War, and the NTF Rebellion as 3 points on this trend line. Political rumor has it the Vasudans Emperor Khonsu II is taking counsel with certain Hammer of Light thinkers, as well as even more esoteric mystics and prophets. The meaning of these actions remains unclear. This is a slight deviation from the Scroll of Atum Karzim, which suggests that Khonsu II stepped down from the Imperial throne 5 years prior to Blue Planet. But we'll roll with it. But for now, that's going to be it for this edition of the database. We will continue after another couple of missions, after which I'm sure it will be added to. This has been the Blue Planet database for Freespace 2 here on Paladin Gaming. This is Paladin Gaming, signing off.